Hey, and welcome to Manx as the Hills podcast. Come join the conversation with your host Chris Parker as we explore behind the scenes of what expat life is really like in China. And don't forget, if this is your first time joining us, check out our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And in this week's episode, we're joined by Jason Thorson. Stay tuned as we dive right into the conversation on expat family life in China and the impacts it's had on their lives. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining. And today we are here with a very special guest and an old friend and colleague, Mr. Jason Thorson, all the way from Australia, the sunny side of the world. Absolutely happy to welcome him here on the podcast channel. And Jason, say hello to everybody. If you want to give yourself an introduction and just let us know who you are.
G'day everyone. Yes, as you said, I'm in Australia. It's summer here, so we've got hot days. I've got neighbors mowing their grass right now, so you might hear a bit of that.
Nice.
But yeah, so obviously my accent is not Australian. So I was born in the States, but I've spent pretty much my entire adult life in Australia. That's where my wife is from. My kids were all born here. Australia's home. And roughly 8 years ago, we went to China. We sold our house, pulled the kids out of school, quit our jobs, and condensed our lives to 10 suitcases and went to Xi'an to start a new adventure. And we ended up staying there for 6 years, which is where we met.
Yeah,
you and I, Chris.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Yeah. Just amazing how many people you meet globally by being an expat. But just the amount of great people you meet as well, like yourself, your family. But being in Xi'an for 6 years, so obviously coming to Xi'an with, you packed up your lives, came here with 10 suitcases. How did you go about doing that? What made that decision for you guys to jump ship and to take on such an adventure?
Well, it was honestly it was a lot of small steps that led to a giant leap into the pool. So I was studying university in Australia just out of personal interest. And in order to finish the degree quicker, we were looking at like exchange programs where I could go to Xi'an, because that's where the sister university was for my Australian university, and sort of knock a big chunk off of my degree. So we looked at various programs ranging from, 6 weeks to a year. We decided on the 1 year program, and then my wife decided to look into work, and she had to sign a 2-year work contract. So like I said, little steps of looking into how to get to China ended up going from, a 1-month intensive language program to a 1-year full-time on-campus study to a 2-year teaching contract for my wife. And that just rolled into us deciding to move there for good, or indefinitely. And It was challenging, but it's definitely something that we do not regret at all.
Yeah, I mean, deciding to be here for obviously 1 month, and then it turned into a 2-year contract, and then 6 years. The time just kept going on and on and on. So obviously, living abroad for such a long time, you get used to, basically acclimatized to what's around you. So how did your family manage when they first came to China, especially being a dad, a father with your kids?
Well, we'd never been to China before, so we literally had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. Like, all of our sort of projected images of what China might be like were completely wrong. So everything was new, everything was a surprise. There was, I would say, a good year where we just constantly felt like fish out of water. Yeah, it was a really trying time for us as a family, but it also bonded us together. Like we literally only had each other in a city of 9 million people that we knew. So I it definitely wasn't always easy, but at least we always had each other. So I
Right.
could imagine doing that experience on my own and finding it a lot more daunting. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like what you said. It bonded you together as a family. You know, if you come here alone, obviously you meet other people who tend to be alone as well. I'm not saying you don't find families, but you tend to stay within your own circle. But having a family, you've got each other to lean on. I mean you know, because you've only got each other, you kind of find a new way to look at each other as well, right? You find, you know, new strengths out of something that may not have been there before. Your kids coming to China, how did they find it?
So yeah, I've got 3 children, and I think they all dealt with it in very different ways. But I mean, as a parent, we of course want what's best for our kids,
Right.
and I hope with hindsight that going to China and giving them a sort of international experience where they were able to meet people from different continents and travel around and see amazing things. I hope that they got more out of that than what they gave up from not living in like a traditional sort of upbringing where they were always in the same country.
Right.
Sort of like my upbringing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, for myself and my children, it is, I'm not going to say the term very different, but it's definitely different because my children's home is China. I mean, they are Chinese. So my kids actually had a harder time going back to my home rather than, you know, coming to China. And it was such a challenging and emotional experience to see them out of their element, which for me, I wasn't prepared for, because my home is my home and I just feel it's an extension of my kids, but actually it isn't, you know, it really isn't. It is a foreign land to them because all they've known is China. And though they get the internationalism, one, because of their school, but also China is so big, they meet a lot of different people as well. But yeah, it's a shock to the system. So I can only imagine what your kids must have gone through, you know, being foreign and coming into China. It sounded like your family enjoyed it. You obviously stayed for 6 years, and then you made the decision to go back home. How did things go with yourself? Anything else in between that maybe you want to talk about as to maybe others who may be thinking about returning home as well, who may have children?
Sure. Yeah. So coming back to Australia, like coming back to normal, was, of course, a bit of a shock. Definitely less of a shock than the initial sort of adventure going into China. You know, reverse culture shock is a thing. And we all had moments where life just felt too easy, which sounds like a good thing. But when you're sort of used to things like, okay, we need to fill the fridge. Okay, that means going onto Taobao or going to 3 different stores to get the right kind of bread or butter or cream or milk. Like everything just, it wasn't easy in China, but we got used to it. Right. So coming back to Australia, where you could just go to a store, for example, and buy everything you needed for the next 2 weeks, and it was all there.
Yeah.
Experiences like that were a shock to me. Like I wasn't expecting something as trivial as going to the store to be something that would sort of take me off guard, because of, you know, after 6 years in China, everything just felt normal. Yeah, going back to Australia, there was a readjustment period to things like that, and you know, people following traffic rules because I had my driver's license in China, so things seemed a lot slower than the pace that we were used to living in a big city. So
right. The supermarket that you talked about, I found something similar when I don't go home very often. We try to go home every 2 or 3 years, but obviously with COVID not being home for almost 5 years, and the last time before that I went home, I think Josh, my youngest, he was just 1, and he's now 6. But when we go
Yeah.
back, it's for a short period. We only go back for 2-3 weeks because that's all we've got for a holiday, and travel time, takes up a lot as well. But when you go back for such a short time, you're excited to see things, but then come to the final week of your holiday, things start to hit hard, I feel. For the first week or two, you're just excited to be back. Everyone's like, hi, hi, hi. But when it comes to the third week, you kind of start getting into a groove of things, and then you start seeing what life is really like, and you're like, wow, I missed that. Oh, I'm not used to that. And just like what you said with the supermarket, going into the supermarket back home, you can find everything. I mean everything. Whether it's Chinese food or Western food, it's all there. Whereas the supermarkets here, they just don't have that. Like if you ask for, I don't know, I'm just trying to think of something that we tend to use in our house. Cereal, for example.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Something as simple as cereal. And I'm not just talking about in Xi'an. I'm talking about China wide. You can't go into a supermarket and say, "Oh, I'm off to the cereal section," because it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But yeah, things like that, it really does hit home. Going back home, 6 years in China. If you were to talk to somebody and they say, "Hey, Jason, we're thinking about going back home," and whether it be back to Australia, America, what kind of things would you advise a family who may have children who are preparing to go back home?
Yeah, I would say maybe take pictures of some of your favorite places. Like, when I say favorite places, I mean things that you see every day that would be memorable. So like one thing that I regret, I didn't actually do this, but I had the thought afterwards, was taking photos that would be memorable to me, that I could look back and sort of reminisce, I guess. Like for example, when you and I were living in the same complex, like I'm kicking myself for having not taken a photo of us standing out in front of the gate waiting for the bus to take us to work.
Right.
Because that was something that was like a special experience that we all shared together. And if I had pictures like that I could sort of look back, or maybe even make a book about anytime I sort of get homesick for China, it would be nice to have something like that. That would be one thing I would recommend, is to take some photos of certain things in your China life that are important to you, that you're going to miss later on, so you can remember them.
That's nice. That's nice. That's one thing that I've always thought about, taking pictures, not just to reminisce about, but to catalog the history that I've had. Being in China for as long as I've been here, one of the biggest regrets, and though when I look at about it, back when I first arrived in China, we didn't have the type of smartphones that we have today with cameras on them. But I regret that I didn't take more pictures of the city, because the pictures that I would have had when I first came to China 15 years ago, and then every year if I took pictures, of the city development, is another world compared to what it was when I first arrived. I really missed the old way that the cities look, and I really wish I had documented that.
I imagine the memories sort of get replaced by the sort of current buildings and stuff.
Right.
It's without the pictures, it's harder to sort of remember what it was like.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And even in your mind's eye, you kind of lose yourself now in where things used to be, and you're like, man, I can't believe that used to be a field and now it's something. And you just think to yourself, man, I should have took more pictures. Going back to Australia, obviously your kids are in school, had to readjust your lives from being from China for a long time. Any good positives that have come from, that you've seen as a family now that you're back in Australia? You've been in Australia for some time now, that maybe you've definitely noticed that you've achieved or you've gained by being back in Australia after moving away from China.
Right. So with my wife, she was able to gain a lot of teaching experience, and also like running a department she got experience in that as well in the different schools that she worked in. So coming back to Australia with, having that experience on her CV allowed her to land a very good job in like the first year that we came back. So it was really great to see her sort of use the experience that she gained in China in Australia, and yeah, she's killing it. So, and similarly, like the children, I mean, I have no way to sort of guess at what sort of kids they would be like had we remained in Australia,
right,
and not come to China, but I get the impression that they are quite confident learners. Like they're great at school academically, but also socially they are quite outgoing, and they've already made lots of good friends. So yeah, I like to think that the experiences that they had in China, where they were the odd one out in most situations, they know what that's like. They know what it's like to constantly have to meet new people, because the expat life is quite transient. Every year you get new people in, new people out. You quickly learn to make friends, and they're using those skills now in Australia. So
yeah, that's a big point there. The expat life while making friends, that I think as you know, that's one of the most difficult things I think expats have to deal with, is making friends actually gets harder. I feel it gets harder. Though you develop skills that you make friends quickly because you know who you're talking to now might be gone in a year or two, but it doesn't get easier to see people leave. I actually think it gets harder. And though many people that you talk to who haven't lived this life feel that, well, you're used to it, people come and go, but actually you cherish your friends, I feel, a lot more being in that expat life than you would back home, because you make such a close connection to a very close few, not everybody, but those few you do, you really cherish a lot more, because you know that the time that you're together is finite, right? It's because eventually someone's gonna make a decision at some point to go somewhere else. When we're not going to be all here forever, so you just cherish and try to make the most of your time with those that are around you, and especially those that you've kind of, when you land here in China, you kind of find at least, I would say, one or two people that seem to then be around you for almost your life, and especially your life here in China, whether you stay in the same city together or not. You still maintain that close contact, but then when you do decide to go back home, those very, very close few, you still maintain that connection, whether it's just a weekly voice message or an email. I find that to be really valuable, compared to if I was back home making friends, I would have, let's just say 10 friends around me, maybe a few of them are more closer than others. But because that person is going to be there forever, it's less likely for them to say, well, guys, I'm moving to China. You kind of put a different perspective on things. But yeah, like you said, your kids have developed those social skills because they've had to be able to learn to make friends quickly in school, because just like my kids, the friends that they're playing with right now in their class will most likely will be gone next year, and then new people come in, so they're having to redo that again. And though that is very hard to see your kids go through, because obviously they like somebody who is now leaving, what we don't sometimes see is the skills that they're developing as well behind the scenes, that will develop them throughout the years, and when they get older, they move on, college, university, or whatever, and life in general, I think they're gonna come stronger for it in the long term.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, wow. But so 6 years in Xi'an, you've now been back in Australia. So obviously taking pictures, a photo book, so you can kind of have that, historic memory that you can just go back to, just to remind you of the times that you've had? With families, you've got to prepare a lot. If you were going to do it again, is there anything that you would do differently in terms of maybe preparing yourself or your kids? Or do you think, listen, what comes, you're just going to have to adapt yourself? But is there anything that maybe you'd do it slightly different than maybe the way you've done it?
I've got one. It's kind of funny, a little bit personal, but if anybody listens to this and it helps them, then you won't make the same mistake that I did. So I thought that I had all of my important papers together in one folder, right? Birth certificates, marriage certificates, degrees, and all of the important stuff, like life stuff that you sort of need. I thought I had that sort of packaged in one spot. But of course, sometimes when you need to apply for things or, fill out forms, these important papers get jostled and put into random places. So I am currently short my children's birth certificates.
Oh no.
And I have no idea what country they're in, what house they're in. In the last year that we were in China, in a 12-month period, we had 5 different addresses.
Wow.
Within a calendar year. So in the space of that crazy time, I really wish that I just had like one binder where anything that's an important paper is in there, and if it gets taken out, it gets put right back in.
Right.
And this does not sort of
leave that folder.
Separated. Yeah. Like we've done that with our passports. That's something that we have a special spot for that we've never lost. But if somebody's considering moving internationally, and presumably you're going to be going through hotels and maybe even like renting a place before you find a place to live in, I would recommend having a system for important papers so you don't make my mistake.
Yeah.
I've gone through all of our papers like 5 or 6 times, hoping that they're just tucked away in there somewhere, but they're not. So,
well, who knows? If anybody is in a house in China or in Australia and you happen to come across this podcast and find some random birth certificates, I mean, feel free to send us an email and we'll get them back. I mean, documents, paperwork, it's actually we've got a drawer in my house that's just full to the brim of every important document. And I mean, sorting that out would be a nightmare. But it's one of those things.
You don't need all the stuff that's in there. So when we were coming back to China, I remember making a pile of like, okay, these job applications I no longer work for. Like I don't need these contracts or these rental agreements. Life is crazy when you're moving to another country, and I guess if anything that can be taken away is maybe give yourself some grace if you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not get. Yeah, because mistakes like that will get made when you uproot your lives and move to another country. So. Oh,
for sure. I mean, 3 kids. Trying to just move people without anything else is hard enough. But I'm so sorry to hear about that. Yeah.
Well, I guess if that's the worst thing that we lost in our travels, then maybe I'm doing pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. Well, Jason, I just want to say a big thank you for taking the time out and
of course,
sharing with us some of your experiences, insights, and advice. Not only coming to China, but also moving your family back to Australia. So thank you for joining us on this podcast today. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. No, it was great. Thank you very much. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to stay up to date on our latest podcast episodes. Click that follow button on our social media channels. Until next time, this is your host, Chris Parker.